Let's shift to the peace process perspective. I think M.J. Rosenberg wrote a government that did not include Kadima, that was a narrow right coalition government, that the Obama administration can deal with Israel and Likud in a more forceful and more robust way. Is that your sense?
That is my sense. It can be clarifying to have a government of the right wing, either to say, listen, are you going to do the Nixon to China? You're in power now. If you think that being in government allows you to expand settlements and destroy Hamas and bomb Iran and have economic peace, be our guests, try. If you recognize that there are things that you can say as rhetoric and slogans from the opposition when you have no responsibility, but then there's a real world out there, then you may actually see Netanyahu leading a very, very different policy. If yes, clearly having the hardliner in government allows them to do things that it's more difficult for the centre-left to do. If not, it really does give a space to have an alternative in Israel. The argument would be that if Livni is there, one can maintain this make-believe process because...
To a certain extent, that's what we've had.
Look what happened under Olmert and Livni. You had endless talks with the so-called moderate Palestinian leadership. They didn't have internal legitimacy, that leadership. They couldn't have done anything anyway. The talks didn't go anywhere. In the meantime, we had 2 wars. You didn't have those wars when Netanyahu was prime minister
created
last time.
Hamas's power and then pretended that they didn't exist. I mean,
Exactly.
That's all that has been...
You destroyed your existing Palestinian partner, and then you go crying, oh, where's my Palestinian partner gone? In a way, let's have the hardliners in the room on both sides. And here's where it's fascinating that you have George Mitchell as the American envoy. Because if there's one thing that it's very difficult to look at Northern Ireland and not come away with, is the strong, strong sense that only when you had the biblical wing of the Unionists, of the Protestant side, and only when you had the hard men of guns on the Republican side, the Sinn Féin and the IRA, only when you had them in the process could you actually deliver something. And maybe this is the moment. Maybe the moment is that with a Netanyahu and with a Hamas, I don't think talking to each other, but if you have international actors talking to both of them, maybe this is a moment of truth for both sides.
And do you think the Obama administration, I mean, obviously, I think it's clear already that they're already being more aggressive about going after Middle East peace than the Bush administration did, probably in their entire 8 years.
Yeah.
Does having a Likud-led government with a guy who is arguably a fascist, does it make it easier for Obama? Does it give him more flexibility, particularly in terms of the Israeli lobby in this country?
I think you're right, and in both directions that you hinted at. First of all, when you have a moderate leader in Israel, the inclination is always to say, wow, this is great. We've got someone who believes in peace. What can we do to help? And it may well be that that person is very well intentioned, but the realities will often lead to foot dragging. And then you're kind of stuck in this dynamic where you've basically ceded leadership to the local forces there. When you've had the right-wing government in Israel, you're actually in a situation where American leadership is more needed, is perceived to be more legitimate. The first big peace deal was not the first 29 years when Labour was in charge. It was when Likud came in. It was when Menachem Begin came in and President Carter brought Begin and Sadat to Camp David, banged heads together, and you got an Israeli-Egyptian peace deal. When Shamir was in government, America's just led a war in the Gulf, the liberation of Kuwait. President Bush Sr., Jim Baker say, we've now got to move seriously on peace. And you actually have the Madrid conference, which gets Syrians, a Palestinian Jordanian delegation, Lebanese, and the Israelis under Likud into the room. Netanyahu, when he was prime minister last time, had to concede on Hebron, was brought to Wye River, shook hands with Arafat, led by Clinton. So you actually, the sense is that there's more space for American leadership when the right is in power in Israel. And as you say, what I think is even more significant in that respect is the context, the environment in which a Netanyahu government will be operating. It's an environment where America is so much more invested in the Middle East, has so much more to lose, troops on the ground, has to restabilize, not further destabilize the region, got to get out of Iraq. The only way you can push back against extremism is by addressing the Palestinian issue. We saw during the Gaza war that it's lost none of its iconic litmus test status, the Palestinian issue, in the Middle East. So I think if you have a president who says, this is what's going on in the region, Israel knows it needs a two-state solution. We want to help it get there, but we're also primarily doing this because it's an American national security interest. I think in that context, especially with a popular presidency, and if he moves early, I think you really have an opportunity here.
All right, well, Daniel Levy, thank you so much for taking the time. Senior Fellow at New American Foundation, head of the Middle East Task Force there. It's always a pleasure, and I appreciate your keeping us up to speed.
Pleasure.